Secondly, let's turn to the lighter topic of Brexit and free trade agreements. Well, I think the two are interlinked, so I think it's right to make an assumption that the subsidy levels won't be the same post-Brexit, and there are going to be other pressures too. And so thinking about diversification and new markets, I think will become part of everyday thinking for the countryside because of the pressures that we'll have. If we sign trade deals with other countries, there's a high probability that the cost of food coming into the UK could well be lower. Not necessarily because standards are lower, just because production systems elsewhere may be less expensive. So for a whole host of reasons, there's likely to be more competition and there's likely to be less subsidy at some point over the foreseeable future. Therefore, I think farmers thinking now about how do they diversify, how do they think about new markets, will be vital to their future success and survival. Well, it depends what you mean by a free trade deal. There have been some deals that have been done very, very quickly, in 4 months, 7 months. Already the UK has outlined what a future deal might look like as part of the withdrawal agreement. And there'll also be some chapters of a trade deal. There are typically 25 chapters, which are straightforward to negotiate, some which are far more complicated. So I would expect that within a year you can negotiate elements of a free trade deal, but there's others that might take longer. So there is no simple answer to your question. Yes, it's possible to do large parts of it, but there are other bits that you might deliberately choose to take a bit longer over. Well, I think that the world's your oyster. If the UK is producing high quality food, which it does, and is focused on areas where we've got genuine opportunities because of our land and our land management. So you might think grass-fed cattle, dairy is good, arable in some parts of the country could be really strong in terms of the standards and the quality. Then there's no market in the world where you couldn't export the best quality. But what the UK has to do, and what UK farmers and the CLA have to do, is think, how do we market UK produce? We've got to market it as being the highest standard, the best quality, the best tasting, and then exploit that in markets around the world. Well, to a large extent, that depends on two things. Where the UK sets its food standards. So if you take the example of pig meat, we banned stalls for sows. Europe didn't, as a consequence of which European pig meat is now less expensive than UK produced pig meat, and what we have to say is that our pig meat is of a higher environmental standard. But we deliberately chose a standard that was higher, and that put more pressure in terms of cost at the bottom end. So we to some extent control our own destiny in terms of price competitiveness or not. On the other hand, if somebody in, say, America wants to export into the UK, they're going to have to meet the standards that are set by the UK. It's not in the gift of the Department of International Trade to just say it can all come in. It will have to be DEFRA, the FSA, the Cabinet, Parliament, all agreeing that we will mutually recognise a different standard. So I wouldn't believe the stories that people hear saying the Department of International Trade will just agree all these things and the food will come in. It's far more complicated than that. The world's going to change. The world is going to change. For the last 40 years, we have been to a large extent protected by being in the EU and part of the CAP. That disappears, and we will set our own policy for import tariffs, export tariffs. We'll have an independence around regulation, whether our regulations are going to be a burden or whether they're going to be an advantage to farmers. In addition to which, you've got to look at the UK economy and the extent to which it can afford to pay subsidy in the short term, medium term, etc. And you've got to look at the state of retailing, and retailers are under real pressure. For all of those reasons, the world is going to change. And I think that members of the CLA need to think about the things I think they are thinking about. We need to be more efficient. We need to think about technology. We need to think about automation. We need to think about the quality of what we're selling. We need to think about carbon and all the things that are being done at the moment to try and protect our farmers into the future. But what I would say is this is a time for huge change.